Hi everyone, it's Robin and welcome back. Today I'm going to share with you how I made this quick and easy Ottoman slipcover. This is the Ottoman that I'm recovering today. It is in great condition still, but the color doesn't really match what I use in my home. So my first step is to drape some fabric over the top of it and to try to line up one long side and one short side of the fabric so that it lays about an inch longer than the sides. This takes a little bit of patience and finagling, but it doesn't take long before you have it in place where you want it. Because I'm using a stripe, I want to make sure that my stripe on the side is nice and level as well. Once I had the fabric positioned where I want it to be, I took some pins and used them to secure the top of the fabric onto the top of the Ottoman to make sure that it doesn't shift as I'm doing my next steps. I made sure to pin each of the corners and the sections in the middle. I probably used way more pins than I needed to, but I'd like to make sure that the fabric is not going to shift on me. Once that was done, I took my scissors and trimmed the excess fabric on the opposite short and long sides of the fabric, making sure I had at least an inch to an inch and a half for a seam allowance. Then, working on one side panel, I gently smoothed the fabric down in the middle and pinned it in place along the bottom edge. From there, I worked my way down towards one corner, smoothing the fabric and pinning it in place until I reached about an inch from the corner of the fabric where I added another pin. Then, starting from the middle, once again, I worked my way to the opposite corner, making sure to stop about an inch from the edge of the corner. I then took my pencil and used it to mark a line along the bottom edge of the Ottoman. This is going to give me my sewing line. I then went ahead and repeated the process of pinning and marking the remaining three sides of the Ottoman. Then it was time to deal with the corners. So what I did was open the fabric up so it sort of looked like a triangle. I then pinched and folded the fabric from the right side towards the center, and then I repeated the process with the left side, making sure to fold it over the fabric from the right side. I then held it nice and sturdy in place and added a few pins at the base of my fold, making sure that I don't pin the fabric to the Ottoman itself. This gives the corners a pleated look, which is a nice accent detail, I think. As an extra precaution, I went ahead and pinned my little folds as well, but I don't need to do that. I don't know why I did it, but I did it anyways. And then when I got done with that, I made sure that I went back with my pencil and drew in my sewing line so that when I remove it from the Ottoman, I know exactly where to sew a seam. Just to show you how I did the corners one more time, I opened the fabric up, pinched and folded the right hand side, and then pinched and folded the left hand side, both towards the middle, held it in place while I pinned the base, making sure when I'm adding the pins that I'm not pinning it to the Ottoman itself. And then marking my sewing line along the bottom. Just to make sure that I didn't pin it to the Ottoman, I give it a little wiggle to make sure that all is well. Once I have all four corners pinned, I'm going to go back and remove all the pins that I used to stabilize the fabric at the beginning of the project. I can then gently remove the fabric from the Ottoman and take it to my sewing machine. I then went ahead corner by corner and sewed a seam along my sewing marks that I made previously along the base of the fabric. I then went ahead and added a seam along my pleat fold as well, starting at the base and sewing up towards the pleat about an inch and a half. I know it's really hard to see what I'm doing on the sewing machine, but I will give you a close-up view of what I've done once I'm finished here, which will hopefully explain it a little better. So here's a little close-up for you. Here's the seam along the bottom to hold everything in place, and then the seam up towards the pleat, which helps give the cover a nice snug fit on the corners. After all four corners were finished, I wanted to add a ruffle to the bottom edge. To do that, I made a piece of fabric that was 4 inches wide by about double the circumference of my Ottoman. I folded that in half, making sure the wrong sides were together, and then sewed a basting stitch along the top edge about 1/4 of an inch from the top. To form my ruffle, I held on to one string from my basting stitch very tightly and then gently pulled and then moved that gather down the length of my fabric towards the middle. Then I just repeat this process over and over again until my fabric is as ruffled as I want it to be. When I'm making a ruffle this long, I like to mark the middle of my fabric, so I'll work from one side making a ruffle up to that mark, and then I'll switch and work from the opposite side making the ruffle to that middle mark as well. For some reason, for me, it just seems much easier to do it this way. Once the ruffle is made, it's then time to attach it to the project. To do that, I found the stitching line that I previously drew onto my fabric, then lined up my ruffle along that edge, slightly overlapping the basting seam of my ruffle towards the raw edge of the fabric along my marked line. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically what I want to do is attach the ruffle about almost 1/4 of an inch lower than the seam line that I drew onto my fabric. And I need to be very careful that I'm attaching it to the bottom side of the line and not the top side of the line, because the bottom is where we have that extra seam allowance, and that is the area that we want to attach the ruffle to. When it comes to the section where the two ends of the ruffle meet, I have a quick and easy solution for this area. On one side, I allow the ruffle to curve towards the bottom raw edge of the fabric. With the other side, I lay it nice and straight across the previously curved area before allowing that section to also curve towards the raw edge. I am probably not explaining this very well, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm doing from the video here. Once I have it all pinned down nice and secure, when I go to sew it together, I will just sew straight across this area here, and I'll have a nice clean edge. With my ruffle pinned down securely, I'm going to go back in with the sewing machine and run a simple seam all the way around the bottom edge, attaching the ruffle to my project. I sew my seam slightly above the basting stitch of my ruffle. This gives me a nice little guide to follow. Once the ruffle is sewn on, I go along with my scissors and trim all of the excess fabric off, so I've got about 1/4 of an inch of raw edge. I'll then go ahead and take my project back to my sewing machine and finish off that raw edge with a zigzag stitch. And this is what my finished product looks like. Now here I like to add one more stitch right along the edge of the top of the ruffle. This kind of tacks that bottom raw edge to the project itself and makes the ruffle lay nice and neat. When I'm done with that, this is what it looks like, and I think it gives it a nice finishing look. And here is what the slipcover looked like when I was done. I think it turned out super cute, and I have made slipcovers like this before in the past. It would be much quicker if I hadn't added the ruffle on the bottom, but I think that adds a nice little decorative touch. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again next Friday for another DIY project. Bye now.